brothers? This is Type-IIx. Welcome to the first true podcast episode on ear growth and gains. All right. So the topics today that I will cover will be DHEA for increasing E2. Topic number 2 will be LR3-IGF-1. Its basics are just totally misunderstood. Allopregnanolone and Pregnenolone will be what we discuss in the third section, the neurosteroids. And then for the fourth section, we will discuss epistane. All right, so first up, DHEA. Okay, it's otherwise known as 3-beta-hydroxy-5-androstenedione or dehydroepiandrosterone. We use this to increase E2 acutely. Okay, so it is an adrenal steroid. It's an androgen in women that can increase T to male levels. And in men, it doesn't do anything androgenically, but it is used primarily to increase E2 rapidly. So whereas testosterone injected, even if you're using testosterone base, it'll increase E2, a day later, 24 hours later, it'll be increased to its peak. With DHEA, E2 will be increased within 2 hours substantially and peak within 4 hours. And then it comes down quickly too. So basically, if you are crashed E2, dealing with that, you can use DHEA to quickly bring up E2 levels to feel better for the joints. And you would use it really as a stopgap until you can increase aromatizing androgen intake. So that's how we use DHEA in men. So with it, it aromatizes at 2/3 the rate of T to estradiol E2, but does so rapidly. So E2, if you take like 200 milligrams IM, like a lot of guys do in one dose, 24 hours, it's elevated and it remains elevated for 5 to 6 days. DHEA peaks at 4 hours. So if you take 200 milligrams of DHEA, you'll be looking at 75 nanograms per deciliter E2 within a couple hours, which is very high if your E2 is coming from low. Okay, so it's really potent at that. Now, if you take 50 milligrams from crashed E2, you would be looking at 25 nanograms per deciliter E2 within 2 hours to 4 hours. So that's somewhere in the range of bringing you from crash to normal. Say if you had a 10 nanogram per deciliter E2 right now, if you were to take 50 milligrams, you'd pretty much get up to 25, where most people feel decent. So TRT increases DHEA, sulfate anyway, but synthetic AAS can decrease it, a lot of them, like 40 to 60%. So other neurosteroids that we'll look at further in the next section or the third section about allopregnanolone and pregnenolone are also reduced. All right, so let's move on to section 2, where we will discuss LR3-IGF-1. So LR3-IGF-1, or long R, is a modified IGF-1, which makes it an analog. It contains a 13 amino acid extension at the NH3 terminal end. It has an arginine substitution for glutamic acid at residue 3, and that's where the terminology long R3 or LR3 comes from. LR3 is more potent at the IGF-1 receptor, the IGF-1R, in its activation than IGF-1 is. When it's given by injection, particularly at twice daily frequency or greater, right? So you have to take this stuff frequently. It is basically 4 to 5 times more potent than IGF-1, at least in its activation. So whereas LR3 is commonly misunderstood by bodybuilders, to be long-acting because of that long terminology, it's actually the opposite. It's very quick-acting, short-acting. So you have to take it multiple times daily. So it's the other result of this is that it's designed to be resistant to binding from the IGF-BPs, the IGF-1 binding proteins. There are 6 IGF-BPs. They variously serve to increase bioactivity or half-life of IGF-1, and they also promote influx into tissues. Some of them are good. Some of them are good for actually activation of IGF-1 function, and others suppress it. But for the most part, you actually want your IGF-1 to bind to these binding proteins because it makes them just active much longer and then also actually get into muscle tissues. So that's why LR3, even though it's more potent at activation of the IGF-1R, it's not necessarily better. In some ways, it's not as effective as IGF-1 itself, like Increlex that the mythical Increlex people claim that they have. Okay, so the IGF-1 receptor controls tissue growth and carbohydrate metabolism. Tissue growth basically refers to cartilage, bone, connective tissue, sinews. So it's mitogenic, meaning it increases cell division and number. Okay. It's also myogenic, meaning that it increases skeletal muscle mass. So really, together, these effects increase total body size. Right? It's not like androgens where it's increasing just muscle for the most part. It's your whole body's growing. It does this mechanistically by inhibiting apoptosis, which is programmed cell death. The other function of the IGF-1 receptor that we care about, besides tissue growth, is carbohydrate metabolism. So IGF-1 and LR3 suppress hepatic glucose output and basically stimulate peripheral glucose utilization, and therefore they are hypoglycemic. So if you're taking any significant amount of real IGF-1, LR3, you would be experiencing something similar to insulin, not too different in terms of milligram to IU potency. By the way, insulin is more anabolic than IGF-1 or LR3 IGF. So let's talk about potency loss, storage, and product veracity in the gray market with LR3 IGF-1. So I spoke to Janashik. This was, in July. This was like February of last year, February of 2023. Back then, he said that 6 to 7 years ago, the provider's IGF-1 LR3 was good quality. However, since then, he's seen a significant trend in decreased potency, probably because it's been sitting around so many years without people buying it. It's really fallen in popularity. But he says that he's seen quite a few samples that are, degraded 20%. Quite a few different peptide samples are replacement product as well with no active ingredient. And recently, about a month ago, so in January 2023, he did say that he came across a product that had been totally inert. Okay, so stored lyophilized LR3, which means in its freeze-dried form, right? Not reconstituted. LR3 definitely lasts years. Okay, and according this comports with manuals from GrowPep, which is basically pharma LR3 IGF-1, but of course it's not for humans. It's for research. It's dissolved in water and stored refrigerated for months. It can last, but you want to have everything refrigerated. So the thing that people need to understand with peptides, and this includes insulin and GH, is room temperature is an extreme temperature. Okay, so 2 to 8 degrees Celsius or 35 to 48 degrees. That's refrigeration temperature. That's where you always basically want to keep your peptides, certainly if they're reconstituted. IGF-1 and LR3 are less anabolic per milligram or per IU than insulin. Visceral organ weight, all right, growth of organs like the small intestine, the intestines, are greater for LR3 than for any other bodybuilding drug. It's non-protein anabolic during fasting or dieting, by the way. Okay, so it doesn't reduce protein breakdown, it stimulates protein synthesis. It's unknown whether it's subject to tachyphylaxis or desensitization that people always claim about LR3. It's not the case. This is because the IGF-1 receptor does not depend on beta-arrestin or G-protein coupled receptors for its function. All right, let's move on to the third section on allopregnanolone and pregnenolone, guys. All right, so so it's the case here that so synthetic AAS, all right, so non-testosterone, have been shown to deplete some neurosteroids. This includes DHEA that we discussed, as well as pregnenolone. But TRT has no effect on pregnenolone and actually increases DHEA. Allopregnanolone is a prohormone, okay, that can be used to activate the GABA receptor potently, which is a receptor that's involved in mood, anxiety. Okay, you might have heard of like GABAergic drugs or gabapentin or Neurontin. They have some involvement with the GABA receptors, but so does alcohol, benzodiazepines. Okay, so GABA receptor, it's a positive allosteric modulator or a PAM. Okay. So pregnenolone, which is also called P5, it's a pro-neurosteroid. And this is what I would say, if you're going to replace things, you got to start thinking about what you need to balance, okay, your considerations, your risks, your trade-offs. The thing that people need to really understand about progestins is they are potently anti-androgenic. They actually antagonize the androgen receptor. They also potentiate estrogen's effects. So when you're taking progestins, they're very suppressive, they're very gynecomastic, especially when you're taking aromatizing androgen along with them. Now, I refer people to, I'm not going to get into it in depth, but I do refer people to my article that I have written distinguishing progesterones from progestogenic androgens, from progesterone and from prolactin. I think that's an important read for everybody. I'll put a link up to that on the podcast later. But basically, with these drugs, progestins, true progestins, right, not progestogenic androgens, you need to really consider whether it's worth the risks that are involved. So what you want to balance are these. So the use of P5, if you're going to use Pregnenolone, right, is the treatment of anxiety, depression, bones and joints aching, okay, adverse sexual effects, all right, which can happen, right, if you have low progesterone, if you have low pregnenolone, okay, you can experience some adverse sexual effects. So if you decide that you want to take it, those are the pros. These need to outweigh the cons, which are the negative impact on the HPGA, right, suppression, their anti-androgenic action, they're antagonizing the AR. You need to consider their potential for habituation or addiction as GABAergic agents, okay, like alcohol and like benzodiazepines. This stuff can actually be somewhat addictive. Now, the things that you also need to consider is the fact that exogenous T supplants the role of DHT, but not necessarily pregnenolone. It also, you need to consider the availability of clinically indicated treatments, like just going to a TRT dose, which improve these things. So yeah, these things do, these progestins, all right, allopregnanolone in particular, but also pregnenolone, they do enhance mood, energy, well-being, stress, but they also promote female sexual behavior, if that's your thing. I don't know, most of my listeners are probably male. Female sexual behavior is like lordosis, arching of the spine in preparation for sexual activity. So it is feminizing stuff. That's progesterone. It's a female sex hormone. All right, so the final topic that we will discuss will be epistane. All right, so let's talk about epistane. So epistane is a very potent androgen. It's still sold in the UK as a prohormone, and it is technically a prohormone. It's a prohormone to MADOL, to desoxymethyltestosterone, which is a very potent androgen. Okay, so with epistane, right, and I was discussing this with OVM MDS in our last live symposium. It was great, the post-talk question and answer section. And he goes, well, epistane, why is that useful for cutting, for contest prep? And basically it comes down to its androgenic potency. Okay, so androgenic potency is what's related to reductions of fat mass more than anything. And so it's anti-adipogenic or fat mass reductive just because of its androgenicity. So in the Hirschberger assay, this stuff, epistane, is 1,100, okay, to 1 in androgenic potency versus methyl testosterone, which is highly androgenic already, more than T. All right. And its anabolism is 91. So it's just so friggin' potent. I think that you guys want to take this stuff in certain cases and, contest prep, deep into contest prep, similar to Halo in its use. Okay. So yeah, I would consider that. So another thing that's really interesting about epistane is how dry it is, right? It's just a really dry compound, dry androgen. Its non-methylated analog, epitiostenol is used in Japan for male gynecomastia, right? And it's more potent at this than masteron. Okay, 50 milligrams of this stuff, this analog, which is non-methylated epistane, basically reduces breast tissue and, is used for gynecomastia in men. It's pretty good stuff. All right, guys. So that's it. I'm going to wrap up the show now. Hopefully you guys found that useful. I'll try to do these things more often, pretty frequently. This is a lot of fun for me. I hope you guys listen and enjoy and come back and enjoy the show. All right, guys. Have a good one.